We're going to move to Representative Filella. Representative Filella has House Bill 5689 regarding low and moderate income housing. This bill defines multifamily housing project as over 60 units in municipality with less than 35,000 residents. Also provides for pre-approval conference with local board of review plan. Representative Filella, you have the floor and our attention. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Casey. Thank you, members of the committee, for hearing 5689 this evening. First off, council resolution should be coming next week. I had asked my town council, a little bit too late, and they hadn't met, so they are meeting on the 8th, so I hope to have it then. First off, a one size fit for all housing is not a single approach to building substantial multi-family low or moderate income housing projects for every Rhode Island city and town. Fails to take into consideration the significant impacts that a large-scale projects would have on smaller communities. Population, say, is less than 35,000 compared to the larger ones. A large-scale multifamily project would have a significantly greater impact on the infrastructure of local services by smaller towns such as Johnston, Burrillville, or Smithfield versus a larger city such as Providence or Pawtucket. Smaller towns will likely have more infrastructure challenges, water and sewer availability, or capacity issues such as the lack of roadways or existing poor road designs. Maybe not RIPTA services or rail services in their area. Smaller towns also have to consider the additional impacts to the strains on existing municipal services that a large-scale project would have, especially on schools, police, and fire. Under this proposal, as defined, the application for a low and moderate housing that exceeds 60 units inclusive of density bonus allowances under the state law in any community that has less than 35,000 residents. Under this proposal, any substantial multifamily housing project in a smaller community won't be fast-tracked through a single application for a comprehensive permit. Instead, this proposal strengthens local community control by allowing a more thorough vetting of the application. The applicant or developer must again submit multiple applications to the various local boards who shall hold public hearings and make findings that the project is consistent with the local needs. Consistent with local needs, as we said, the school system, transportation, and the infrastructure of the town. This bill would have the developer or the applicant go through the following process. Pre-application conference, which would concept a plan detailing the project. A preliminary plan review would provide documentation that the project is consistent with the local needs. Another requirement is that the local board must now make findings that there are no significant negative impacts on the local needs, including the school system, public transportation, and the public infrastructure of the town. A further new requirement is that the majority vote of the entire board is needed for approval, not just those that are present. Then the final plan review, the applicant or developer must now come back for a final plan review. It cannot be done administratively. At this stage, any changes, whether minor or major, to the plans approved at the preliminary stage must go through a new review and hearing process for the approval. New requirement that it is a majority vote of the entire board is needed for those and not just those that are present. A local review board's failure to act within the prescribed period will not constitute approval of the plan for a substantial multifamily housing project. As you can see, Mayor Policina is here from Johnston, and I know he'll be able to answer any questions that the committee should have, or myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Filella. Are there any questions right now from the committee? Representative Speakman? Okay. Yeah, why don't we take you, Your Honor? Go right ahead. Please introduce yourself to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mayor Joseph Policina Jr. I'm before you today to express my support of not just H5689, but more importantly, I believe its premise. 252, 218, and 155. These are the numbers of units for just some of the high-density projects proposed in communities with populations of not 35, but 30,000 residents or less throughout Rhode Island. I wanted to read to you an excerpt from an article that was in the Valley Breeze, and it has to do with one of the many high-density projects that's going on in Smithfield. And it reads, representing the developer of Greenville Farms, Attorney John Mancini said he understands the pushback on large developments. The Residences project that was at issue, is proposed in an R80 rural zone. He said pre-comprehensive permit mandate, he wouldn't be able to propose this plan. Quote, you'd laugh me out of Smithfield so quickly, my head would spin, he said. We in Johnston were good and quite frankly, lucky enough to find a tool to push back, but this is not the case for every community. Why do these high density projects not belong in these small communities? Quite simply, for the same reason R40 and R80, suburban and rural density, doesn't belong on the I-95 redevelopment land right out here in Providence. It simply doesn't fit. It doesn't fit aesthetically, financially, or practically. But let's take a step back from the subjective for a minute. Let's speak in objective terms with facts and data, and we'll use the proposed 252 80% AMI, a low-income apartment complex that was proposed in Johnston as the illustration. 2%, meaning 2% of Johnston's entire population of 30,000 would come from just one housing project. 16, the highest density apartment complex in Johnston within a 1 mile radius of the project. 1.85 million, the cost of educating 80 new students, which would come from the project. 1 million, the cost of manning and purchasing a new rescue. But there's more numbers that I really want to point you to. 75,549, the median household income from Johnston, well below the Rhode Island median of 81,860. And 450,000, the median residential property value in Johnston, below the state median of 494,000. Maybe communities like East Greenwich, Barrington, Jamestown, and Portsmouth, all ranking 1 through 4 in median income in Rhode Island respectively, have the wealth for modest and annual property tax increases for large affordable development complexes. But I'm still waiting for the day proposals like these make their way down to the state's wealthiest coastal communities. As of right now, these proposals are happening in blue-collar, working-class communities like Johnston and others just like it. Communities where its residents are more likely to pay attention to the grocery receipt, gas pump, and property tax bill. And those are the people that I am here on behalf of. In closing, I think everybody supports the term affordable housing, but I believe the term has a different meaning to different people. And speaking on behalf of the people of Johnston, I can represent to you that our version of that term is single-family homes, whether leased or owned. This is what we are pushing in Johnston, whether it's 30 condos of 120% AMI off Shunpike, or 120% AMI owner-occupied condos off Pine Hill, which would be about 15 units. The other half of the project is in Situate. The 1,000 square foot starter house I purchased in 2012 for $215,000 should not have sold for $435,000 in 2023. It's great for me, but it's not good for the recently married couple who wants to move out of their apartment into a starter home. And just for the record, I do not think this bill should pass as it stands. I think a tiered system would be more fair, where the unit cap varies based on population. So, for example, if you have under 10,000 residents, your cap should be lower than if your population is between 10 and 20,000. Then an increased cap for communities that are between 20 and 30,000, so on, so forth, and make it enabling. Because at the end of the day, we're all different. What works for East Providence doesn't work for Smithfield. What works for Johnston doesn't work for Pawtucket. But one thing I think we can all agree on, the self-pride that we have for our own respective communities both in its character and its people. And working off the premise of this legislation allows us to do just that, while still allowing communities to individually address their housing needs as they see fit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any questions? Representative Fascia, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, as co-sponsor of this bill, I have a statement that I'd like to read into the record.
How long? How many pages?
2.5.
Can you go ahead and do that quickly?
I can.
I will allow it.
The proposed legislation regarding substantial multifamily housing projects represents a critical shift in the ongoing dialogue surrounding low and moderate income housing developments in municipalities with populations under 35,000. This initiative acknowledges the urgent need for affordable housing while also recognizing the diverse and special needs of different communities across the state. By establishing guidelines that are considerate of local requirements, the bill seeks to strike a balance between addressing housing shortages and maintaining the integrity and character of small cities and towns. One of the main arguments in favor of this legislation is the emphasis on local context. The phrase, "what's right for Providence or Pawtucket may not be right for Burrillville or Exeter," encapsulates the fundamental principles: housing solutions cannot be one size fits all. Each municipality has its own unique demographic, economic, and social dynamic that influences the viability and desirability of multifamily housing developments. For instance, a large influx of new housing units in small towns might strain existing public services such as schools and transportation, which may already be on the brink of capacity. In contrast, more urban areas may have the infrastructure to accommodate additional population growth more readily. The bill promotes the idea that consistent with local needs. This clause ensures that housing developments are not only responsive to the needs for affordable options, but also considerate of other vital factors. For example, the health and safety of both future occupants and existing residents must be safeguarded. Additionally, impact on local school systems and infrastructure cannot be overlooked. Communities must be adequately equipped to sustain growth, and the bill encourages local councils to conduct comprehensive hearings to assess these impacts thoroughly. Moreover, the call for equitable application of zoning and land use regulations further strengthens the legislation. By ensuring that both subsidized and unsubsidized housing developments are subjected to the same standards, the bill fosters an environment of fairness and transparency in housing policy. The approach not only ensures that new developments align with the character of existing communities, but also mitigates the potential of stigmatization of affordable housing developments. In conclusion, the proposed legislation surrounding substantial multifamily housing projects is a meaningful step toward addressing the affordability crisis in many communities while respecting local contexts. By advocating for local input and equitable treatment of housing regulations, the bill effectively aims to balance the urgent need for low and moderate income housing with the necessity of maintaining the quality of life for existing residents. This thoughtful approach has the potential to create sustainable, diverse, and thriving communities across the state, ultimately benefiting everyone involved. Local communities know what's best for local communities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Fascia. Do we have questions for Representative Fascia? Representative Speakman.
I don't have questions for Representative Fascia. I have questions for the panel.
Okay, for the panel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Representative and Mayor, for bringing this bill forward. It does, as you know, undo much of what we have done in the past 4 years in the Speaker's legislation, and I gather that's your intent. Which it's very controversial legislation, and we've worked very hard on it, and I hear all the time that it is insensitive to the needs of smaller communities. I live in Warren, and I hear that all the time. I disagree, but I hear it. Mayor, you mentioned that you speak for the blue-collar and working-class residents of Johnston. This is housing for those folks. right? Low and moderate income housing is housing for working class and blue collar Rhode Islanders, right? Who live in Johnston or elsewhere. You also mentioned, and you did too, Representative, this substantial multi-family housing project. Those are by definition low and moderate income developments. So if a developer came into your community or any community to which this would apply and proposed a development of 65 luxury apartments, that would be welcomed in your community?
I think as long as it meets the needs of the town, as far as like the infrastructure, like we mentioned, the schooling, the police and fire, the sewer and water, all those type of things. I know the mayor could probably allude to more.
Yeah, I would say no. I don't care if the houses are, $1,800 a month or, they're $750,000 condos. No matter how you slice it, 252 units is very large for a mid-sized community like Johnston. So if that was something to edit in here to apply to everything, I would be for that.
Yeah, the definition on page 4, line 19 describes a substantial multifamily housing project as any application proposing to build low and moderate income housing that exceeds 60 units, not 235. And it is, again, it applies just to low and moderate. This new procedure that you have defined throughout the bill that would require an intensive vetting of the application for this proposal appears to apply only to multifamily housing projects that are of low and moderate income. So if it's your intention to make it more difficult to build all multifamily housing in your community and other communities under 35,000, I would suggest that you remove the language that refers to low and moderate income. If it's your intention to eliminate low and moderate in your community, then keep the language in. I don't know what your intention is, but so that's just, again, a language change you might consider. The proposal that was the process through which the application would go that Representative Filella describes, a pre-application preliminary plan and onward. That is, again, we have done a lot in the past 3 or 4 years to try to encourage construction of homes at all price points, home ownership and rental, because we are short probably 27,000 units. This would, for any multifamily, it sounds like your intention is for it to apply to all multifamily. This would make it very difficult to build multifamily housing, which again is housing that our children live in when they graduate from college, our seniors live in when they move out of their 4-bedroom colonial. So I would urge that you consider that this will make building much housing that Rhode Islanders need difficult. And again, well, there's a lot to say, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Speakman. Representative Fascia, please.
Good evening, Mayor. In your concept of this bill, do you see any moratorium on, say, duplex housing?
Yeah, I think the goal of this bill was not just, my primary concern is Johnston. I know that there's other communities that are going to speak to this after me as well. But it's kind of like the example that I gave about the 195 redevelopment district. It's just out of character. You wouldn't put up 40 single-family homes over there. You would make that high density because of the area that it's in. So it's the same logic, but it's the inverse for a community like Johnston. Our eastern side, as you know, is a little bit more dense because it's older, and the western side is a little bit more spread out. But that's kind of the best example I can give.
Thank you, Representative. Deputy Speaker Hull, go right ahead.
Thank you, and my distinguished colleague. As I look at the bill and read the bill, it almost reminds me of snob zoning. And I understand what you're trying to do for your city or your town. But what our speaker has done at the course of this session and previous sessions is to open up housing for people throughout the state. As I look at some of the fine notes in the bill on the board and the character that's made up, that it has to be final and everything, those things are designed to keep people out. You know, and I understand you're protecting your community. I absolutely understand that. This is why it sits in the General Assembly, and the Speaker came a different route to say, we need to look at everybody in the state. And Representative Speakman's right on point. You know, certain things need to be taken out. But we need to work at it to benefit the people in your community, because we're not here to cut your community off. But we also want to include other people in the state that may want to live in your community, because your community is a good community. So I thank you on that, and I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee at this time? Representative Morales, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just start by saying that this is a creative way to keep poor people out of certain communities. Now, in regards to my question, looking at page 12, section D, in regards to failure to act. Why is it that when it comes to any traditional project, if the reviewing authority is not acting within the prescribed manner, the project is able to move forward, yet we are making an exception for this quote-unquote substantial multifamily home housing project?
I think when you're looking at projects of this size, the way I'd understand it is that if you're under the 10%, which, as we heard Rep. Brien say, I believe it's 4 communities are at above 10%. So those other 35 communities are subject to housing being put through the comprehensive permit. The main issue that we were having, in addition to the costs, which I outlined for you, the fact that, you know, I don't have a very wealthy tax base where I can go and increase taxes. These pieces of land that were put together for this large development were not zoned for this high density development. And that's why I keep using the example, and I know your response will be, well, you know, housing is a crisis, so it doesn't matter. But it's I keep going back to the 195. You wouldn't put form.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize, but that's not my question. My question is in regards to section D on page 12, failure to act. It says here that anytime within general law, a reviewing authority is not acting within the prescribed period of time that they have to review a respective project, and the project will move forward. Why is it that in a case like this, we're essentially saying, hey, the rules don't apply to the reviewing authority. They can drag their feet, they can ignore the process, and that doesn't mean that the project's going to move forward. Why are we making that exception?
I think that's something that should be looked at to be taken out. The only thing that I would consider is, are you speaking to a failure to act? So I understand from other projects that we've had, if an appeal is not made, then you forfeit that right. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm referring to the fact that, for whatever reason, this bill is proposing that a reviewing authority does not have to play by the rules, and they could essentially not act within the quote-unquote prescribed period to review the final plan, and even then it won't mean that the project moves forward. So we're applying a different set of rules specifically just for this development. And that's an issue. We have some of these uniformed laws within general statute for a reason. And so it does not matter what type of housing development is being proposed, they should be acting within that prescribed period.
Yeah, I think that can be removed. Again, I don't think that's the essence of the bill, so I would agree with that.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other questions for the two folks here from the committee? Okay, thank you very much. Rep, thank you for introducing. Mayor, thank you for coming to the committee. I'm sure hopefully we'll see you again sometime. All right. We now have Mr. John Tassoni from the town of Smithfield, and Amy Raynone. Amy, are you signed up to testify or just? Okay. Amy Raynone has submitted written testimony against this legislation. Is there a Mr. Charles Bennett? Yes. Would you like to testify, sir, or are you just here in support?
I want to just listen for now.
Okay, thank you, sir. Gail DeWare is signed up against this legislation, and we're going to have Melina Lodge. Melina, why don't you join Mr. Tassoni on the stand, and we'll let you two go at it for right now. I'm just kidding. So, I'm sorry, guys. I don't mean to do that. Mr. Testoni, pardon me for, I have a colleague at my other job named Testoni, so I keep calling you Testoni.
Okay,
I
Mr.
apologize
Chairman,
for that.
I get it.
It's a pleasure to see you here in committee. Thank you for coming. Go right ahead, and we'll have questions for both of you after both of you testify. Thank
So
you.
I'm here on behalf of the town of Smithfield. We've been hit with between 500 and 700 units in a short period of time. I want to give you a little bit of background. Back in 2004, there was a big issue with housing, and what we did in both the Senate and the House, myself and Representative Kennedy, we put a moratorium on building to stop at that particular time in order to grapple with all these housing units that were going up throughout the state. I think some issues need to be looked at when legislation is put forth on the housing end, as far as the infrastructure, police, fire, water, sewer, schools. And I think the mayor said earlier pertaining to schools, and I'm glad that he mentioned Smithfield because we're neighbors. But the issue that we see in Smithfield, a lot of the open land is being grappled by developers. High density bonuses, a lot more housing. I'm not against housing. I was the chair of housing and municipal government for 6 years. Did 2 bond issues before Melanie was brought on board. That's why we're friends. But I think altogether, when we do something like this that affects the state, we need to walk before we run. Now that I'm the president of the council, we have budgetary issues, and I think we're going to have more budgetary issues along with the state moving forward. And how do we handle that? How do we handle the infrastructure? How do we handle the school issue? One development has got 3 or 4 bedrooms right next to a school that currently right now it looks like in September I'm going to have to put 2 outdoor school rooms on the school. So if that is built and children need to be educated, that's going to cause a burden to the town. I don't know the answer. What I do know is that when the floodgates opened with all this legislation, it's putting a burden on the outlining communities, as the mayor said. Smithfield is close to 6%, and we're having a hard time getting it to 7%. We have a school that's vacant that we'd like to turn into subsidized housing, but it's just too much, too fast. I don't know what we can do about it. I mean, I'm willing to work with anybody because I was on that side of the bench. It's a hard thing to do. One of the things that we grappled with back in 2004 is to change the name of low to moderate income housing to workforce housing. That's one of the things that you should probably maybe take a look at, because growing up, low to moderate income housing is not the same as what is low to moderate income housing today. And still people have that in their mind, that they're going to have all these people come in and all these kids come in. And it's not really that. It's workforce housing. Police, fire, teachers. They need places to live. And I think, maybe you should take a look at that. I'm just throwing out suggestions. But I know, I have one of my other councilmen here. We're having a tough time with it. We're having a tough time with it. And, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead. Continue.
No, and in closing, I'm here because I've been on the other side of that bench. I'm here to work, try to help out. The other thing too I'd like to say is that I'm also in favor of Rep. Santucci's bill 5689, excuse me. And I think we all need to get in the room together and try to figure this out. Because the floodgates are open, a lot of communities are going to be in tough shape.
Thank you. We're gonna hear from Melina first, and then we'll take questions and statements. Melina, go right ahead, please.
Good evening, Melina Lodge again. Thank you so much. Obviously, we are here in opposition of 5689. Sorry, John. I think as structured, we see significant adverse impact on the development of critically needed affordable housing by adding red tape, establishing separate processes and approval procedures for the legislation, as Representative Speakman pointed out. The definition of the multifamily housing substantial multifamily housing projects is a bit problematic, aside from being completely arbitrary. 60 is a very arbitrary number. Not clear what the basis for that designation is, but the fact that it singles out the development of low and moderate income housing makes me think a lot of municipalities will be spending resources defending their actions in court as a fair housing violation, simply because you will be absolutely limiting the types of housing development that can happen, which disproportionately affects households of color and other marginalized populations. So the representative in her presentation also represented a number of considerations that, as you know, she called it, municipalities of populations with less than 35,000 persons needed to consider, but I would argue all municipalities of all sizes need to contemplate those things, not just small ones. And as drafted, the 35,000 designation would effectively apply to all but 8 communities in this state. So this would be widespread diminishment of the progress that we've made. I do agree, and I'll give credit to Smithfield. Having worked with them over the last 10 years, they have really made the effort to try to move the needle forward, and I have appreciated that. But there is still more work to be done, and we're not going to get there if we close the doors. So I agree, maybe we can sort of noodle around the language and find out where there's some compromise, but unfortunately this is a deal breaker for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will have questions from the committee. Representative Edwards.
Thank you. Senator, how many units are you looking at currently in Smithfield?
On the board in Smithfield right now is between 500 and 700.
Okay. Well, when you talk about the floodgates have opened, they were opened a year ago. In Tiverton, we already have about 1,000 approved, and we're looking at another 500 to 600 that are trying to come in. The town does have the ability to not approve these units based on water sewer connection, access, and infrastructure. So you are not without aid in the housing bill. It's not easy, but you are not without aid. I know Tiverton has accepted the ones that will work with us and we have the infrastructure for, but we're trying to keep out some of the ones that we don't have the infrastructure for. And that's why I'll be introducing a lot of bills on behalf of the town.
Well, we already have some in the pipeline, but it's just, we have obviously a lot of apple orchards that farmers cannot afford to keep anymore, that are looking to sell big lots of property. And the density bonuses, you know, there was one on particular, and Melanie testified that, was at first when they came in, they were at 240 units on a 2-lane road with 3 or 4 bedrooms. And we had to run the water from Route 7 all the way up to the project. And then obviously well, not obviously, but I did speak to the developer, and I said, listen, that's not going to work over here. You need to get it down. So he did. He got it down. But it's still on a 2-lane road, a country road, 109 units. It's still going to be tough. I understand what you say about denials, but as she said, denials turn to Superior Court.
Superior Court of the build. I mean, the towns and the planning boards have got to be willing to make the tough choices to figure out the units that they will accept,
yeah,
and also the ones that they do not want because of structural or infrastructure problems. I know we've looked at it really closely. I know there's one in Tiverton that is particularly hated. And we have the railhead just arrived in Fall River, which is 5 miles from Tiverton. So Tiverton is soon to become a bedroom community of Boston. So add that to the mix and you'll have, like I said, we have about 1,000 approved already, preliminary approval. We are looking at least 500 to 600 more.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, there's a piece of property right now that's going up for auction on the 23rd of April. If a developer gets that piece, there's probably another 300 or 400 units. Just saying.
Have your planning board and your council look at that. I would recommend. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Edwards. Deputy Speaker Hull, go ahead.
Senator, you're a council person now, correct?
Yes, sir.
So you're for this bill?
Yes, sir. But it needs work, obviously.
Okay.
That's what I said in the beginning.
Okay. And because what I'm concerned about, there's a lot of stuff going on right now with housing, and the speaker's moving like gangbusters, and he's not to a point where they want to forget about the communities. We understand that, but there's something that has to be done, because if we don't do anything, it just stays stagnant, and we still have people without homes.
No, listen, I get it, and that's why I recommended maybe we all should get in a room.
We absolutely do.
All get in a room and should lock the door, and then whoever gets out first wins.
No, but you know the speaker.
I'd like to chair that meeting.
You know
it's going to be me and you.
You know the speaker. I'll get out. You know the speaker.
Yeah.
So I think
I've had conversations with him,
and so that would save us a lot of times because we're working with it.
Yeah, no, I get it. We all need to get in the room like we did in 2004 with myself and Rep. Kennedy. We had everybody in the room. We had a moratorium. When we came out of that meeting, it wasn't 1,000% good bill, but everybody went away a little bit disappointed, and that's a good bill.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Are there any other questions? Representative Speakman.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator, I agree with Deputy Speaker Hull that the room's been open for 4 years now, right? We've been working on these bills. This is the fourth package. And I would urge the municipalities who all say one size doesn't fit all, bring specific proposals. If you don't like density bonuses, the mayor mentioned tiers. I'm not sure what he meant, but, you know, maybe that's a good idea. We hear this all the time. You have the League of Cities and Towns. You have the Planners Association. They do weigh into these things. They don't always get what they want. Nobody does. Melina doesn't either, although she's pretty effective. And we have extreme need, right? The 600 units that are coming, that you say your community is being hit with, people will be living in those. People will have homes. That's something to celebrate, right? We should consider the impact on infrastructure and on schools. And it's funny, in your testimony, you mentioned a vacant school, but in the next breath, you mentioned pressure on the schools, and you're going to have to put 2 portable classrooms in. And I know you can't tell. Population comes and goes. I understand that. But as Rep. Edwards said, there's a way to do this, to manage the growth. And I do commend Tiverton for working on managing this growth. Welcome to the Boston suburbs. My goodness, I've never heard it described that way. So again, welcome to the room. There's plenty of people in it already, but there's still some space. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee for our 2 panelists right now?
Just a comment on
yes,
Rep. Speakman. The school that I mentioned has been vacant for 5 years. We had a total $40 million bond issue that we added on to schools, but we had to close that school because it's right on Route 44, which is like only a few feet from the highway. We're having problems with traffic and buses. So the town decided, before I got where I'm at, decided to close that school and add on to the other schools. So that's why we're trying to turn that into housing.
Perfect for multifamily housing.
Elderly housing. Yep. That's what we're trying to do right now.
Great. Amy Raynone's right here. She can help you with that.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator, Councilman Tassoni, I appreciate your
Thank you.
Public service.
And you can call me anytime. We'll get this done.
I appreciate it. I appreciate everything else you do for the community.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so we have 2 other folks here. There's a Miss Deborah Garneau and a Stephen Garneau. Would you folks like to speak? Yes, sir. And if there's anybody else in the room that would like to speak on this legislation that I haven't called yet, please come forward. Otherwise, I do have Randy Rossi, who is in favor of the legislation, not speaking, and who has submitted written testimony. He is from the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns. And I believe I've mentioned everybody on the list. So, Stephen Garneau, yes. Go right ahead, sir.
My biggest concern with all of the development.
Sure, could you push the button up? It's counterintuitive, but yeah, that's the way it works. Thank you.
All right, I'll pull it closer. I'm a little nervous too, I'll be honest. My concern is with the density bonuses and this one size fits all. I live in Situate, and we are responsible for the reservoir and for 60% of the state's drinking water. Currently, there's a proposed a plan in place to put 42 units on the Situate-Johnston line. 6 acres of land in Situate, 27 units. If you take into consideration the roofs, the roads, the parking spaces, and all of that, there's not going to be much land to absorb that water from runoff. It's a very high point in Situate. The development will have town water, but it will not have town sewer. 9,000 gallons plus of human waste or just wastewater will be put into the ground on that side of town. My well is right on the line. Many of my neighbors' wells are right on the line. It's in the middle of the watershed. That watershed was built in 1930-something to provide water for the state. If you look even in Johnston, 3 miles down the road, you've got the landfill that isn't too far away from our watershed. If we keep, building these houses, we're taking a great risk of contaminating your drinking water, or the state's drinking water. It doesn't matter how many people live in that town. The city of Providence owns the majority of that town, and they own all that forest for a reason, because it protects that water. That is my biggest concern with the density bonuses. 6 acres of land, 27 units. And you're going to call it low to moderate income housing. Each unit in there is $350,000. That's for the low income. I'm a top step teacher in the state of Rhode Island. I can't afford that. I have a son that graduated college recently. He can't afford that. So don't say it's low and moderate income housing. It's not. Can I answer any of your questions?
Yes, Representative Speakman has a question. Thank you for your testimony. Just relax, and thank you for being here. It's difficult to get up here for the first time.
Yeah, you did great. Yeah. So you support, you're in favor of this bill then?
I'm also a U.S. Army veteran.
Right.
I know that housing is important.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but you support this, the approach in this bill you support. Is that why you're testifying?
Yes, because of the density bonuses.
Okay.
It's too extreme.
Okay, I understand that. And I appreciate what you're saying about the reservoir. Not the first time I've heard it. We rely on our colleagues at DEM to make sure that there's not that kind of intrusion. I'm not familiar with the specifics of this project. So tell me again.
It's not just this project. It's the density bonus everywhere.
I understand. But the specific project you're referring to is
42 condo units on Pine Hill. It's called Pine Hill Estates.
Thank you. That's all I need.
It's on the Johnston-Situate line. 27 units will be in Situate. The remaining will be in Johnston.
Got it.
They will have town water, but a septic system.
And again, we're not a planning board. We can't make judgments about specific projects, but it is good to know the kinds of projects that folks are concerned about as they are affected by this law. So I appreciate you bringing that case to our attention. Thank you. Thank you.
Are there questions? Representative Cruz, go ahead.
Just a follow-up. Did you say specific to that development would be something that you couldn't afford?
I could not afford a home in that development.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I'm a top step teacher in Rhode Island.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Rep. Quattrochi, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you for coming, making the trip down here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not easy to come down here, park, wait for everybody, wait for your turn.
And it's very warm in here too.
Yeah.
I will say that.
Thank you. Okay, I'll work on that.
It saves some money on heat. Turn it down a little.
Is there anybody else, Representative Fascia?
I just want to clarify, do you live right on Pine Hill Road?
I live on South Crestview Drive.
Okay.
And if I'm relying on, to be quite honest, if I'm relying on the town and the state to protect my property, I'm in the wrong there, because the land was clear cut without putting up silt fences. It damaged people's properties. It damaged people's wells in the neighborhood. So people in my neighborhood don't have drinking water because their wells were damaged by this development. They didn't put the silt fences up afterwards. There was a cease and desist order. The developer continued to work through it.
Just sheepishly, I must admit, this is my district. It is the very edge of my district. Those 27 homes are the last, I think maybe 5 of them may wind up in my district. And I'm curious, I haven't been there yet, except when the initial water lines were laid. And I saw the degree of damage that was done to the roads while this project was taking place. And because I'm not that familiar with that area of Situate, have you, I'm just looking for an opinion of how school buses might turn around up there? And
Pine Hill is very narrow.
I know.
South Crestview is very narrow. Can't imagine a school bus turning around up there.
Okay, so we're
I'm just
coming
curious.
a little bit off the subject.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So let's, this is bill number 4 of our 10 bills that we have this evening, and there's a lot of people here to testify, so I appreciate that. Let's try to stick to the subject. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Are there any other questions from the committee? All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. That's going to close the hearing on House Bill 5689.